Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. It began with a declaration that echoed across the world of international trade. Former President Donald Trump announced the United States did not need Canadian lumber, framing it as a threat to national security. This was more than rhetoric. It was the start of a sweeping protectionist policy. On October 14, 2025, the U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, with threats to raise it to 30% by January. This sudden move disrupted decades of stable, cross-border trade, casting uncertainty over businesses on both sides. Kitchen cabinets, furniture, steel, and cars, targeting not just Canada but the EU, Mexico, India, and Brazil. The idea was simple: make foreign goods pricier so Americans buy American, hoping to revive domestic manufacturing. But many warned of higher consumer prices and retaliation from trading partners. Legal challenges quickly followed. On August 29, 2025, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled most of the tariffs illegal, setting up a Supreme Court showdown in November. The stage was set for a major economic and legal battle. The world watched as the U.S. and Canada braced for the fallout. To grasp the impact of the tariffs, consider how deeply U.S. construction relies on Canadian wood. Each year, the U.S. imports about 12 billion board feet of Canadian softwood, one-third of all lumber for new American homes. The plan was for U.S. sawmills to fill the gap, but they were already running at 95% capacity, with aging equipment and worker shortages. Even with major investment, experts said it would take nearly a decade for the U.S. to become self-sufficient. In the meantime, the U.S. faced a shortfall of over 3 billion board feet, an immediate supply crisis. When demand stays high and supply drops, prices surge. The tariffs, meant to help U.S. producers, instead triggered a perfect storm for price hikes. The policy ignored the deep integration of the two economies and the years of mutual reliance. The American housing boom was built on Canadian wood, and now that foundation was cracking. The consequences would be felt far beyond the lumber yards. The tariffs' effects hit the market fast. Lumber prices soared, jumping past $650 per thousand board feet, then rocketing to $765 as supply tightened. Construction companies faced a crisis. Their main raw material was suddenly unaffordable and unpredictable. The National Association of Home Builders calculated that every 1% rise in lumber costs added $1,000 to the price of a new home. The tariffs and price spike tacked on an average of $10,000 to each new build. Housing affordability plummeted, and the dream of homeownership slipped further away for millions. The policy meant to protect jobs was now fueling inflation and hurting families. A few lumber companies benefited, but the broader construction industry and home buyers paid the price. The pain was spreading far beyond the original trade dispute. The extra $10,000 per home was a deal-breaker for many buyers, especially first-timers. In states like Texas, Ohio, and Florida, booming housing markets stalled as builders delayed or canceled projects. Uncertainty made it impossible to give buyers firm prices or completion dates. Banks grew wary, tightening credit for new developments as costs and risks soared. The entire pipeline of new housing slowed, threatening jobs across the construction sector. Ironically, the tariffs designed to boost American jobs were now being criticized by builders, unions, and economists. While a handful of sawmill jobs might be created, far more were at risk in construction and related trades. The slowdown meant less work for carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and more. Instead of a jobs boom, the policy brought economic hardship and uncertainty. The American dream of homeownership was slipping further out of reach. The ripple effects were shaking the industry's foundations. The policy's unintended consequences were impossible to ignore. Canada faced a choice: retaliate or adapt. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada chose resilience over escalation. Ottawa launched a $500 million initiative to help lumber producers find new global markets, plus a $1.2 billion support package for the industry. Provincial leaders, especially in British Columbia, set ambitious targets to redirect exports away from the U.S. The goal: never again be so vulnerable to a single trading partner. Diversification became the new mantra. By avoiding a trade war, Canada preserved broader stability with the U.S. while focusing on strengthening its own industry. Investments weren't just defensive, they aimed to build a modern, globally competitive lumber sector. This quiet pivot would soon transform crisis into opportunity. Canada was preparing for a new era in global trade. Canada's response sparked a wave of innovation in its lumber industry. Instead of exporting raw logs, mills shifted to higher-value products like engineered wood and premium timber. Government support fueled modernization, with new technology making mills more efficient and globally competitive. The industry moved up the value chain, becoming a sophisticated manufacturer rather than just a resource supplier. Before the tariffs, 90% of Canadian lumber exports went to the US, a vulnerability now being addressed. Trade delegations found eager partners in Asia, Europe, and beyond, from Japan to India and the UK. Japan alone increased imports by 26% in early 2024. New deals were signed with Germany and South Korea. Canada invested in expanding ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert to handle booming overseas trade. The map of Canadian lumber exports was redrawn almost overnight. The crisis had become a catalyst for global growth. Canada was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. The industry's transformation was swift and profound. A new chapter in Canadian trade had begun. As Canada adapted, the US faced mounting challenges. Domestic lumber giants like Weyerhaeuser profited, but the broader construction industry suffered from high costs and supply chaos. The dream of a manufacturing revival clashed with the reality of a stalled housing sector. The policy created a few winners and many losers. Meanwhile, Canada's industry was not just surviving, it was evolving. Diversification and modernization made it more resilient and profitable. The crisis had forced Canada to build a stronger, more dynamic industry. The contrast was stark. Protectionism brought short-term gains for a few in the US, but long-term strength for Canada. The fortunes of two nations had dramatically diverged. The lumber tariffs sent shockwaves far beyond their intended targets. The most immediate effect was a surge in inflation, making housing less affordable for millions of Americans. The Yale Budget Lab projected the tariffs could shrink US GDP by 0.6% in 2025, as the construction slowdown rippled through the economy. Fewer homes meant less demand for everything from furniture to appliances. The policy, meant to help one sector, hurt many others. In Canada, the crisis triggered a permanent shift. Lumber diversified, new global supply chains formed, and reliance on the US shrank. Even if tariffs vanished, Canadian producers would be wary of returning to old patterns. The episode fundamentally altered US-Canada economic ties. It showed that even close allies aren't immune to the fallout of protectionism. For Canada, it was a lesson in the power of diversification. For the US, it was a warning about the risks of going it alone. The story of the lumber tariffs offers lasting lessons. The US underestimated its deep economic ties with Canada, disrupting a supply chain built over decades. The result: inflation, a housing slowdown, and a blow to homeownership dreams. Canada's response: innovation, investment, and global outreach, turned crisis into opportunity. Protectionism may help a few, but often hurts the many. Canada's lumber industry emerged stronger and more globally connected. The dispute is a cautionary tale about the limits of trade barriers and the value of cooperation. Strong, stable trade relationships are assets not to be discarded lightly. In a world of uncertainty, collaboration and open markets remain the surest path to shared prosperity. The price of going it alone, as the US learned, can be steep indeed. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel for more updates.